and we will now move on to the next part of this morning's proceedings, which is our panel discussion and Q&A. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome three extremely interesting speakers. We have Professor Sir Adrian Smith, who is President of the Royal Society and Director and Chief Executive of the Turing Institute, the National Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. Good morning, Adrian. We have a first for Parliamentary Links Day, which is, it's my pleasure to welcome Monica Dean. Monica is Senior Expert Advisor supporting the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate at the US State Department, and Monica is joining us live from Washington, DC. So Monica, thank you for getting up so early in the morning to be able to be with us. And my third panelist is Sunan Jiang, who is a Minister Councillor for Science and Technology Affairs at the Chinese Embassy here in the UK. Now I'm going to invite each of my panelists to speak for between 7 to 10 minutes, after which we will then take some questions. And so I will, if you are getting close to your 10 minutes, I will indicate to you so that you know to wrap up, if that's okay. I'm going to kick off with Professor Sir Adrian Smith. Adrian.
Good morning. For a long time, the science of climate change has been associated with understanding the problem. And that's, of course, important. But I think we've moved on, and the debate is no longer about the scale of the problem. It's now about what we're going to do about it. And science certainly has some of the solutions. So ahead of the recent G7 summit, the science academies of the member nations joined forces to call for more concerted action on climate change and biodiversity loss. That summit resulted in ambitious targets for net zero, but I think in the view of many of us, there was not enough on how to deliver the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions to reach net zero and how to adapt to the reality of global warming. Right now, we need governments all over the world to establish evidence-based, transparent roadmaps on how to get to net zero. Specifically, which low-carbon technologies and nature-based solutions are truly ready to deploy now, which need further development and demonstration at scale, such as CCS, and which need further research, such as alternative aviation fuels. These roadmaps are essential to demonstrate how countries will match actions with words. They will also ensure that public expenditure will deliver value for money, provided the greatest reduction in emissions for every pound spent when budgets are stretched. Reducing uncertainty in the future direction of low carbon technologies should also help drive private sector investment. Each of the countries represented on this panel have made commitments to cut in emission. Now we need to put our scientific know-how to the test with solutions. We all have strengths in different low carbon technologies, and transparent roadmaps should allow us to work together to be more efficient and to maximize results. International collaboration and shared investment are essential if we're going to create global economies of scale for new low carbon solutions. Future scientific solutions must translate into technologies that are affordable for all, not just the wealthy nations. So at the Royal Society, we've been working with scientists from around the world ahead of COP26 to identify critical technologies and research areas that should be prioritized. We've published 12 policy briefings which summarize where investment can make the biggest difference. These range from revolutionary ideas for heating and cooling buildings to scaling up technologies like green hydrogen and ammonia fuels, from carbon capture and storage to nature-based solutions in forestry, agriculture, and land use. The UK government has been a leader in setting non-zero targets, but targets are meaningless without delivery. So far, 12 billion has been allocated over the next 10 years, but this is not enough to green a 2 trillion economy and achieve net zero emissions by 2050. The UK net zero strategy expected this autumn should establish an independent technology assessment body that can shape the UK roadmap to net zero. Such a body would identify which technologies are ready to deploy, which need further development, and which need further research. And it can help build political and public consensus about the route to net zero, and importantly, go beyond current political cycles. In less than 6 months, the nations of the world will come together in Glasgow for COP26. If they were all to commit to developing technology roadmaps for net zero, it would show that they're about more than just words, we're about action. I think there is cause for optimism. Over the past year, we've witnessed the power of science in a global emergency. Scientists working together to understand the COVID-19 pandemic, find treatments, and ultimately create the game-changing vaccines. So we've shown that we can come together in the face of crisis. A generation of climate research has starkly demonstrated the crisis we face. If governments raise their ambitions with science as a guide, then we can change the course and build a sustainable, resilient, non-zero future. Thank you.
Adrian, thank you very much indeed for that. I think you've hit the nail on the head, and that we need to move from talk to walk and get on with it and find those solutions. So thank you very much indeed for that. I will now go to my next panelist, which, as I said, is Monica Dean, who is joining us from Washington. Monica, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to join Parliamentary Links Day. I'm delighted by the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you all today, and I'm particularly excited by this year's theme of science and climate change. You know, for all the talk that we have already heard this morning about the need for increased climate ambition by politicians, none of this conversation would be possible without a solid scientific basis, right? The science has been and continues to be the guide for understanding and addressing the climate crisis. The science has only grown with certainty on the causes, impacts, and future risks of a changing planet. And increasingly in recent years, the science has also become explicitly clear that we're just not doing enough. And for those of you who don't spend your days reading climate journal articles like I do, all that's really needed recently is to turn on the news or go outside and see the latest record-breaking heat wave or increasingly powerful cyclone. Science has been explaining for decades now what is palpable. We can see it, we can feel it. Climate change is here. It's impacting lives and livelihoods around the world. It's no longer just a model or a report predicting future outcomes from rising global carbon dioxide. We can now tangibly measure how climate change is already affecting the world around us. Which brings me back to why today's conversation on science and climate change is so important. And I just want to make 3 quick points on science, and then I'll talk a bit about this year and the US priorities. So first, while we can already feel the effects of a changing climate, our need for science is only growing. While many decades of research have already predicted with striking accuracy the rise in global temperatures, there's still so much we don't know about climate change. From health impacts to agricultural innovation or changes to ocean circulation, what we don't know is still as large as what we do know. And to support preparedness and resilience to the impacts we can no longer avoid, as well as to guide our decarbonization efforts, science must continue to be at the heart of all climate action and policy. And so we need science and scientists as partners in addressing this crisis. Second point, the balance of social and natural sciences is critical. One of the most important trends we've seen in sciences recently is the collaboration between social and natural scientists. Climate change isn't just the physical changes that are happening to our planet, but it's also the societal changes. It's impacting cultural traditions, livelihoods, and addressing this crisis fully requires massive transformations in how we live, how we eat, how we move in order to fully decarbonize. And so social sciences are a critical piece of addressing this, and collaborations between the natural and social science are critical to fully understanding the risks and opportunities of how we solve this crisis. And my final point, the third point, is we need science to speak loudly and clearly. Scientists have long been some of the most trusted messengers on climate change. But despite this, the divide between scientific publications and decision-making and policymakers remains large. And a lot of it is because we need skilled science communicators helping translate this critical research to better inform decision-making and public understanding. We saw this with COVID. This new generation of science communicators has risen and helped the public understand the risks to their health. And so the world can only act on science if we can understand it. And so we're really hoping to have, again, great partners in the scientific community helping us translate this, which brings me back to the reason I was asked here today. This year, we are attempting to translate the science into action, to put global progress on addressing the climate crisis in line with what the science has shown is needed, which is nothing less than a wholesale transformation of the world as we know it, right? That's why President Biden rejoined the Paris Agreement just hours after being sworn into office. It's why he's directed a whole of government approach to put America on an irreversible path to achieve net zero emissions economy-wide by 2050. It's why the Biden-Harris administration has placed climate change at the center of US foreign policy, in diplomacy, and our national security. But with more than 85% of global emissions coming from beyond our borders, we recognize that the US cannot solve this challenge alone. We need the rest of the world to accelerate their progress alongside us, all of us working together at a pace and a scale that this crisis demands. And that's why President Biden convened the world's major economies at the Leaders Summit on Climate in April. And to lead by example at that summit, President Biden announced a new and a more ambitious emissions target of a 50 to 52% reduction by 2030. But despite these efforts, where we are right now, global commitments still aren't enough to do what the science has said is necessary to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And according to the most recent studies, despite the drop in emissions in 2020 due to COVID, emissions are trending in the wrong direction again, right? Increasingly high levels of CO2 are accumulating in the atmosphere, which is why the COP in November in Glasgow, when nations are going to meet, we need to increase our efforts to keep 1.5C within reach. And that means we need to redouble our energy and accelerate global progress. We need to phase out coal 5 times faster than we have been. We need to increase tree cover 11 times faster. We need to ramp up renewable energy 6 times faster. We need to accelerate to electric vehicles at a rate 22 times faster. You get the point. Everything has to be done with a greater sense of urgency. And it's about committing to more than net zero, as Dr. Smith just said, right? Like committing alone is not enough. And so when we go to Glasgow, all countries must be clear about what steps will be taken in the next 10 years to accelerate this progress. This challenge means that all countries must be setting bold and achievable near-term targets at home in policies, as well as in their nationally determined contributions or NDCs to the Paris Agreement. But governments alone cannot solve this crisis. Climate change requires an all of society effort. We need everyone working towards climate solutions and innovations and resilience, driving investment, supporting communities, and most important for today, continuing the scientific research and innovation. We need to get the entire world on a path towards net zero emissions, and we need to make sure it absolutely does not happen no later than 2050. And so we have to make every month count, every day count on the road to COP26 to chart this new path. And we're planning on taking every opportunity we have, but we know that we can't do this alone. And so we look forward to working with all of you in government or in the scientific community in order to solve this crisis together. Thank you.
Monica, thank you very much indeed for that. And I think that final point that you make, that we all need to work together, scientists, politicians, legislators, but also I think we need more engagement with the public. And you talked about the cultural and economic impact of climate change on individuals. And I think that's a message that we need to communicate more so that there is more shared ownership of this. But thank you very much indeed for your words. And we go to our third and final panelist, which is Sunan Jiang, Minister Councillor for Science and Technology Affairs from the Chinese Embassy. Sunan, welcome. Thank you for joining us. So could we hear your thoughts on this very important subject?
Okay, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Mr. Chen, first of all, I would like to give my thanks to the four host MPs and also the Dr. Ben from Royal Society of Biology. Thank you for your invitation. It is a really delight for me to attend the Parliamentary Link Day. I'm not like Dr. Smith and Monica is experts in the climate change. Although like that, I would like to share with you Chinese view on climate change. Since the industrial civilization, mankind has created massive material wealth, yet it has come at the cost of intensified exploitation of natural resources, which disrupted the balance in the Earth's ecosystem and the line burned the growing tension in the human-natural relation. In recent years, climate change, biodiversity loss, worsening desertification, and frequent extreme weather events have all posed a severe challenge to human survival and development. Faced with a challenging global environmental governance, the international community needs to come up with the ambition and action, just like Smith and Monica said. We need to act with a sense of responsibility and unity and working together to foster community of life for man and the nature. We must be committed to harmony between man and nature. Mother Nature is a cradle of all the living things. It provides everything essential for humanity to survive and thrive. Mother Nature has nourished us, and we must treat nature as our roots, respect it, protect it, and follow its laws. Systemic spoil of nature will take away for the foundation of human survival development. We should protect nature and preserve the environment like we protect our eyes and endeavor to foster new relation where man and nature can both prosper and live in harmony. We must be committed to green development. Green mountains are golden mountains. To protect the environment is to protect the productivities and to improve the environment to boost productivities. We must abandon the development models that harm or undermine the environment and must say no to short-sighted approach of going near-term development gains and the expenses of the environment. Much to the contrary, we need to ride the chance of technological revolution and the industry transformation, seize the opportunity in green transition, and let the power of innovation drive us to upgrade economic engineering and industry structure, and make sure that the sound environment is there to buttress sustainable economic and social development worldwide. We must be committed to people-centered approach. The environment concerns the well-being of people in all countries. We need to take into full account people's longing for better life and a good environment, as well as our responsibility for future generations. We need to look for ways to protect the environment, growing economic, create jobs, and remove poverty, all at the same time, so as to deliver social equity and justice in the course of green transition and increase people's sense of benefit, happiness, and security. We must be committed to multilateralism. We need to work on the basis of international law, follow the principle of equity and justice, and focus on effective action. We need to uphold the UN-centered international system comply with the objective and the principle lying out in the UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement, and strive to deliver the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We need to each take strong action, strengthen partnership and cooperation, learn from each other, and make a common progress in a new journey toward global carbon neutrality. In this process, we must be join hands. We must be commitment to principle of common but differentiated responsibility. This principle of common but differentiated responsibility is cornerstone of global climate governance. Developing countries now facing multiple challenges to combat COVID-19, grow in the economic and adjust climate change. We need to give full recognition to developing countries' contribution to the climate action and accommodate their particularly difficulties and concerns. Developed countries need to increase climate ambition and action. At the same time, they need to make concrete efforts to help the developing country strengthen the capacity and the resilience against the climate change, support them in finance, technology, and the capacity building, and refrain from the create green trade barriers so as to help developing countries accelerate the transition to the green and low carbon development. China honors its climate change commitment. China will strive to peak carbon dioxide emission before 2030. President Xi mentioned this, announced this last year, and achieve the carbon neutrality between 2060. This major strategy decision is made based on our sense of responsibility to build a community with the shared future of mankind and our own need to secure sustainable development. It is in line with the highest possible ambition requirement for the Paris Agreement, and indeed reflect Chinese highest responsibility climate ambition. When developed country took 50 to 6 years to go from carbon peak to carbon neutrality, China will take only 30 years to deliver the same. This means that China needs to make the world's biggest cut in the carbon emission intensity in the shortest time span in world history. It also means that there needs to be a broad and a deep economic and social systemic change, which is an important element and active choice for China's high economic development. Of course, science is vital in this to achieve this goal. The target of a carbon peak and the carbon neutrality have been added to China's overall plan for ecological conservation. We are now making an action plan to strictly limit the increase in coal consumption. Moreover, China has decided to accept the Kigali amendment to the Montreal Protocol and the tightening regulation over non-carbon dioxide emission. China's national carbon market will also start trading very soon. China will host the COP15 this October, looking forward to working with all parties to enhance the global governance on biodiversity. In conclusion, we hope that COP26 places signals of green development, systemic governance, people-centered approach, and multilateralism, and the principle of common but differential responsibility should be released. Negotiation on the unsolved issue about Paris rulebook should be finalized, provide institutional basis for the full and effective implementation of the Paris Agreement. We understand that the UK is working hard to prepare for COP26. We believe that the UK will make COP26 successful by hosting the event in an open, transparent, comprehensive, and balanced, consensus-driven and party-driven way. We support COP26 in achieving positive outcome. Thank you.
Sunan, thank you very much indeed for that. And it's good to hear that there's sort of a common agreement across all parties on the way forward, which kind of brings me to my first question, which is being submitted anonymously. But to achieve climate ambition, all nations need to play their part. Does the panel think citizens are now won over by the arguments, or is climate change skepticism still a challenge to successful delivery of policy objectives? Would anyone like to comment on that?
I'm happy to jump in here.
Monica, please.
Yeah, I think that overwhelmingly there's been increasing public recognition that climate change is real, a crisis, and deserves, rightly so, urgent political attention. I think we can credit, honestly, the scientific community for a large part of that, right? Is the IPCC report, for instance, was front page news for probably a good 24 hours, if not more. And so this growing public awareness of the real and imminent threat of climate change and the scientific understanding of that has helped create an environment where the public wants to see action. And so I no longer think that it's about skepticism. I think that the discourse is really about what solutions we choose and how we choose to address it. So is the preferred policy a carbon tax, or is it another economic tool, right? And so that's where I think that the discourse has changed, is what are your preferred solutions and how are you going to get there, and how is everyone going to be involved to ensure that it is a equitable transition to a more sustainable economy.
It would be nice to think that it was pure scientific logic that was convincing everyone. I think extreme weather events are very helpful too, to be honest.
That too, yeah.
Thank you. I mean, do you see the same thing in the UK, Adrian? That there is now a wider acceptance and less skepticism. It's just now a question of talking about policy issues.
To be honest, perhaps I should, but I'm not aware of proper survey material. But in one's personal life, I think that the awareness is clearly out there. People are concerned about transport, but as I say, the conversation in the bars is really about extreme weather and how that demonstrates that we've all got to wake up. So let's use whatever comes along, whether it be science or whether it be the weather.
Thank you.
Yeah, I personally believe that the country action is very important, but the citizens is also very important when, especially when formulating the policies, national policies. If the citizens' awareness and the government have a high degree of consensus, I mean, both citizens and the government, this policy will be very effective, especially in implementation will. On the contrary, if this policy is very good, the government think, but the people have adopted that, the effective may be not so good. So this requires very good communication between the government and the citizens. So science is very important, like the Royal Society, and also the Royal Society of Biology in the UK. A lot of organizations done this. So I think this should be very good communication between science, government, and the citizen. Yeah. Thank you.
Agree.
Thank you. Right. My next question probably follows on from that a little bit, which is from Alistair Allen. Is what are the key areas of research that are important for addressing the climate crisis, and what are your governments or governments doing to facilitate or encourage this? And I think you talked about that, Monica, about the unknown, what we don't yet know, and we need to do more research. So do you want to start off on that one?
Sure, yeah, I think, well, to start with, the United States has this lovely thing called our own National Climate Assessment, which is produced every 4 to 5 years. And that's our best way of sort of conducting the research across the board of how climate change is impacting the United States and what are some of the response options. In terms of where the knowledge gaps are, this is continuing to grow by the day. But one of the things that really jumps out at me is around soil carbon. And as an increasing conversation is had around the role of nature-based solutions and the recognition that you need to balance both nature and your climate strategy, we still don't fully understand the role of blue carbon ecosystems. We still don't fully understand the potential of soil carbon sequestration in agriculture. And so there's tons more to be done to really capture all of this potential of utilizing nature, but also having it benefit biodiversity, right? Making sure it's done in a way that doesn't harm nature and also improves food security or resilience in the case of marine protected areas. And so I think there's a lot more work to be done here to fully understand some of these solutions beyond just energy efficiency technologies or sort of more technological approaches to carbon dioxide removal or sequestration.
Thank you. Sunan, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, for example, in Chinese case, and the basic research, basic problem concerned climate change is very important. Also, the Ministry of Science Technology and the National Science Foundation, the money to do some research in this area. Of course, in China, we are looking the main sector. I mean, emission is from energy sector and the manufacture and the transportation and also the building. So this kind of related to technology also is very important for, I mean, now for the research in this area, because we are thinking the energy, sustainable energy, green energy, this area is account for the main emission in China. So this problem, we should help tackle this problem by science and technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Adrian, any thoughts on areas of research?
Not much to add to what Monica said there. I think I would go back to let's not over-focus on research. We really need to do the audit of what we can deploy, what we need to develop, and what we need to fundamentally research. And then we need to prioritize the investments. But a lot still to be done. I mean, if you just take the importance of energy storage and batteries, huge amount still to be researched in the field of batteries, huge amount to be researched in can we really deploy hydrogen and ammonia to travel around the world if we're going to travel around the world. So the agenda is endless in a way. But I'm going to keep repeating, coming back to that's why it's important to do an audit and have a roadmap, because we're going to spend finite resources on this. How do we maximally employ the resource? How much into research, how much into development, how much into deployment?
Okay, thank you very much.
Just to jump in on that, I think, Dr. Smith, your point is especially valid. We cannot use an absence of research as a delay in implementing the solutions we know works now, right? That's the key, is we have enough information now to take the actions and to start implementing a lot of this work. And at the same time, we need to continue the research to make the batteries more efficient, to develop the new fuels of the future, et cetera.
And as one, I mean, there's often a rather crude notion that, you know, there's a thing called research and then there's an arrow that leads to stuff. As you develop and as you deploy, it throws up new research questions. So the research won't go away.
Brilliant, thank you. Interesting question submitted by Stephen. I don't know which Stephen, which it is basically, how much of an understanding do you think your own countries have of the problems faced by others as we meet at COP26 to find a way forward? Because I suppose that's a very important point, is, you know, we are, as developed, wealthy nations, may be facing entirely different problems to those nations around the world where the impact of changes will be greater on them and on their ability to develop. So just some thoughts on that and understanding from your own country perspectives.
Could I come in first on that? Because I think that was very much what we are trying to push in the Royal Society, and we discussed with the G7, is that, you know, each country is different, both in terms of the issues and the potential solutions. So I think a start would be if everybody could agree on what kind of format of a roadmap to try and develop so that we could then have, international comparisons of the agenda. But every country, I think, has to start with its own roadmap.
Do we have a role in helping to facilitate that in countries where perhaps they're not sure where to start?
Well, I think that is perhaps one of the things we can try and drive through COP26 is to get that on the agenda and to begin to agree how we set about producing such roadmaps, what they need to contain.
Brilliant, thank you. Monica, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think there's a really key phrase here, both in the Paris Agreement and in a lot of the language in the G7 and elsewhere, and it's called national circumstances. The reason the Paris Agreement has nationally determined contributions, which is what is each country going to come and bring to addressing this climate crisis, is because we recognize that every country has unique circumstances, right? The challenges with which a country in Latin America will be grappling with the climate crisis while trying to develop is totally different than a country in Southeast Asia, right? And so I think there's a strong recognition that there are vast differences in problems faced by other countries. And there has been room given to acknowledge that and to try and allow countries to develop their best way forward for themselves.
And
Yeah, Dr. Jiang.
yeah, and also as I mentioned, because we should balance. I think we should balance the developed country and the developing country, because, for example, they already set some principle like the common but differentiated responsibility, and also the especially some area is still in the poverty situation. So we should balance the economic growth and the climate change. So this should be a very good balance. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. Right, I'm going to move on to a question now from David Gillespie. And it really comes to this point of adopting technologies that we already know we have now. And this is around the take-up of low emissions and zero emissions vehicles in the US. Most market predictions show slower take-up of zero emissions vehicles in the US than in EU or China, although I suspect, certainly I know about the UK, take-up is still relatively low. What policies can be put in place to accelerate this transition, both in the US, China, and the EU? Who would like to?
I can jump in first. I think the US, back to differing national circumstances, we have a real challenge with range, as we call it, range anxiety, right? Is how long can you hold a charge on your electric vehicle? And we do not currently have the charging infrastructure necessary to overcome that anxiety. And so EV uptake has been slow. And that's a large part of why President Biden's new infrastructure proposal is focused on deploying 500,000 chargers across the country in the next 10 years, right? It's not only amazing jobs to go and build the charging infrastructure, it then helps mobilize the infrastructure necessary for electric vehicle adoption. I think the other thing that's sort of helping this is that just efficiency of these vehicles. And so we're seeing all sorts of financial incentives for the purchase of a new electric vehicle compared to other vehicles, be it a clean air standard or a fuel efficiency standard. And so I think those sorts of policies as well that get you a tax incentive to purchase a new electric vehicle will also help drive that adoption.
In China, sorry. In China, the new energy vehicle is booming. I think maybe less than 7 years, and almost, as I know, almost account for half of the total the world new new energy vehicle. And in China, 80% is the EV. Actually, now it's already more than 10 years, because I come from the Ministry of Science and Technology of China. As I remember, year 2008, our ministry already set the program, the basic research in new energy vehicle, especially the EV. Because maybe you know, our former minister, Science Minister Wang Gang, he was working in the automobile company, and he's expert in the vehicle, Wang Gang. And so at that time, so we are very put a lot of focus on the new energy vehicle, especially the technology support. So now it's booming in China. So every month is very quickly. Even some foreign car manufacturer like the Tesla, like the other company to sell the new energy vehicles. The sales in China is booming. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, how have you dealt with this issue of charging infrastructure to sort of address the range anxiety issues?
And for example, there are several ways. For example, this is much more in the government support, and also the enterprises participant is very important. Even some foreign energy company involved with this, and also in some local government, and even like the distance campers and all the distance would like to build this charge equipment. So I mean, in China we are coordinated with the government, the market, and the user, and also the market, the company participant in this. Because this is the need. China is the biggest developing country, so still a lot of people need to cars.
Okay, thank you. Adrian?
Can I use this discussion to make a slightly more general point? You know, you start talking about a vehicle, and then of course part of the solution has to be the creation of infrastructure, you know, energy charging infrastructure, and then part of the other equation could be economic incentives, and the other could be research if you solve the problem of battery, for example. So I think the point I want to make is that we talk about these single kind of issues and ideas, but actually we really need to see it in terms of systems thinking, because there's a whole interconnected thing of the technology, the economy, and the research. That's why we need to see joined up roadmaps rather than focus on individual questions and issues, I think.
Okay, thank you. We will move on to the next question, which is really one about the corporate world agreeing to zero emissions. Could the corporate world agree to zero emissions strategies which affect their commercial profitability? And what strategies could really lead to collaboration which bring in understanding and transformation of mindsets, ultimately net zero and a truly sustainable and safe planet? Basically, how do we get companies to work together while protecting their own individual profitability? Any thoughts on that? It's a tricky one.
I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I think we're already seeing companies do it. There have been company after company has come through and committed to net zero, if not by 2050, then earlier in some cases. And so you're seeing these new coalitions of companies, the likes of Amazon, Netflix, Microsoft, et cetera, Google, all of them, right? Like they're all coming forward with net zero strategies. And part of the reason is because they see climate action as profitable rather than the risk that comes from inaction, right? And that is the mindset we need to get to for a safe and healthy and sustainable planet, is recognizing that there is greater risk in not addressing this climate now for your company and your assets than doing the hard work. So I think there's a ton of momentum there. I'm actually really excited to see it, because I think that's one of those things where, again, governments alone, as much as I would love to say we can all solve this, we can't. We need the private sector. We need companies and civil society and everyone else to do their part in order to reach this, you talk about systems thinking, this wholesale transformation of society. And so I think that's actually one of the areas that's most exciting right now.
The thing I would add to that, of course, is that in developing the technologies and deploying, there are fantastic opportunities for private sector.
And in China, I think that this is the process of a transition. For example, the government already commitment to the carbon peak and the neutrality 2060. So now for the government, so every department, I mean the central level, will make the action plan, and also the later maybe will the local government. So we'll ask for example, especially the big company, for example, energy company, that should have a plan to how to get this decarbonization and the zero carbon. So I think a lot of a company now in China now is already thinking to how to do this, how to reach the goal. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's interesting what you said, Monica, about there being almost a commercial advantage in going towards net zero. And I think that probably demonstrates the public willingness or awareness to accept that things have to change to address the challenges we face. So thank you for that. We've now got a question from Brian Hanley, who is asking about the role of nuclear technology. And Brian says, if we want to reduce emissions in line with agreed targets as outlined by science, we will need to embrace nuclear technology for energy creation and genetic modification for food and other natural resource creation. Are politicians brave enough to stand on these twin platforms and explain to the public why they are necessary? Sounds like it's sort of aimed at me and my political colleagues, but I'm going to ask you to say what you think on this.
Speaking with a Royal Society hat on, I mean, what our job really is to place the science and the technological challenges and possibilities. And it goes back again, I mean, the courage of politicians in some sense is to do with public reaction and public acceptance and so on and so forth. So I think just reiterating what was said earlier, there is a massive communication and bringing public on side job to be done. And the political class should be playing a major role in that, of course.
I completely agree. Do you agree with the premise of the question that nuclear has a role to play and genetic modification, presumably, of organisms?
I'm absolutely sure if you do the arithmetic at the moment, nuclear certainly has a major role to play. I think, there'll be research and balance questions as to what you achieve through genetic modification, but clearly the thing is to have those scientific and technological tools available is the job of some of us, and then it's for others to decide on the deployment.
Great, thank you. Monica, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'll start with the nuclear. One of the many announcements that happened during the Leaders Summit on Climate was a new investment in small modular nuclear reactors. I think, again, the premise of today, there's a ton of research and a ton of innovation to be done on nuclear and the ways it's deployed. And part of it will be a communications challenge, as we're all saying, to show that small modular reactor is different in terms of its efficiency, safety, and deployability than the traditional nuclear plant, but that it has this amazing capacity of base load energy. And so I think there will be some balance needed there. And I look forward to sort of seeing how that technology advances. On the genetically modified food, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of food scientists, hopefully on this, thinking, well, most of our food is genetically modified, right? It's all hybrids, it's crossbred. So really, again, it's a communications challenge. A lot of us are already eating genetically modified food and fruits, so they taste sweeter, or fibers, so it's more nutritious. I think it will become increasingly important to probably advance our knowledge of food nutrition as crops change and food regions change in their productivity and water scarcity happens, right? So all of those things to build food resilience and food security will be necessary. And again, this is why, if there's one big call that comes out of this, we just need amazing science communicators to talk about the benefits of some of this work and this research and how it can help improve lives and livelihoods.
Thank you. And final word before I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up, to you, Sunan.
And the nuclear, I think the nuclear energy also is kind of a very important energy. When I was working in the embassy in UK, I was told UK is the first country to commercialize use the nuclear power in the back to last century, during 1950s. So like Dr. Smith and Monica said, we should balance the security and the safety in the nuclear energy. As I know, China only, the nuclear power energy is only accounted for more than less than 5%. The total is still very small number of in the energy sector. Thank you.